today we're going to be taking a look at another postmodern principle of design. And this one specifically taking a look at the relationship between image and text. All right, this is an important strategy in our contemporary world where we find that images and words are all around us and become a really interesting material in which artists can use in order to create their work. So by the end of this lesson, there's a few things that you should know, do, and be able to accomplish. And the first thing is we need to know how text and image are similar. We also need to understand that there are some differences between the two that make them unique forms of communication. We also need to be able to make associations between text and images. And lastly, you're going to be working to create a mini artwork or a series of mini artworks that create tension between text and image. All right, so here we go. All right. What I want to start with is understanding that this is a concept developed by a art educator out of the University of Chicago in Illinois by the name of Olivia Goody. And she wrote an article several years ago outlining the idea of the postmodern principles of design. She recognized that the traditional elements and principles of design, or the elements of art and the principles of design, are a modernist way of looking at the world. It's language that was developed back in the late 1800s and in the early 1900s as a way of thinking about and describing artwork. Right? This belongs to what we refer to as the very formalist aesthetics of the early modernists, right, in which there was this idea by the 1940s that the principles and elements in and of themselves were sufficient to communicate any ideas and feelings that the artist might want to communicate. And this is what led to the high abstraction of Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko in the 1940s. Right, but Goody recognizes that we don't live in that same world as the 1940s, and we live in a world where images are in our pockets and text is all around us using the different technologies. So we need to be able to use these things that weren't quite as prevalent in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and we need to have new vocabulary and new strategies that reflect the world in which we live. So let's start by just kind of unpacking this idea of an image, right? And hopefully by looking at the exemplars here, right, there's a lot of variety. They're all stylized. But in each of these cases, no matter how complex, such as this one up at the top left, or how simple compared to the one down in the bottom right, we are able to immediately understand this idea of fish. We have an ability to have a direct connection between what we see and what is represented and having an almost instantaneous recognition, right? So this immediacy of images is really, really important, right? And we can see this in a variety of different works, right? So this is an image that is from the Lascaux Caves in France. This is one of the earliest images that was ever created, or at least one of the earliest ones that we've discovered in our postmodern world. And it's at least probably about 16,000 years old, right? It's an old image. But what is important to recognize is that in the broader context of the cave system in which this was found, right, there isn't complex symbols. The imagery is literally the animals that would have been within their visual environment. And there's a documentation of their lived experience. And the picture of the animal, right, is the form of communication. We also see from this Harappa seal from Indus Valley, right? Indus Valley is one of the earliest civilizations, and Indus Valley is found in sort of the contemporary area of Pakistan and northern India. Right? And these types of symbols have been found on pots and clay tablets and a variety of different seals, such as the one that is shown here. Okay. What is interesting here is we see a combination of different types of markings. We see some very deliberate and symbolic visual elements, right? But we also see a bovine animal here that, again, to the people of Indus Valley, most likely would have been recognizable really, really quickly. And if this is a form of writing system, which I believe that it is, then there's only a select few people that would have been able to access what this says. However, most people within the society would have been able to recognize and understand the bovine animal here. Okay, so we have one more example, and this is from Algonquin, which is north of in northern Ontario, near Darky Lake in Quetico, Ontario. And here we see a moose, a mother moose, a cow, and her young calf, right? And again, in all three of these examples, it's really important to remember that being part of the culture and being in the environment also aids to the identifiability of the subject being seen, right? So if we were to take somebody from Indus Valley and then show them this particular image, they might not recognize it because it's outside of their context, right? And that's something that we also need to remember, right? Context is extremely important in order to allow an image to communicate effectively. All right, so images, they are direct, they're contextual, but there is a shared sense of recognizability in what it is that we see. On the flip side, we have text. Text is highly encoded, which means that there is an abstraction that's taking place, right? So instead of seeing the fish that we started with in our previous slide, we are substituting the image with a series of symbols that, when put together, create the sound that we use when we see the image. There's so many levels of abstraction that text becomes incredibly difficult, right? So in order to understand the word fish, right, at least the very English word of fish, right, I need to understand what this symbol represents. This symbol represents f. This one represents I, and this one s, and then huh. But then I also need to recognize that there is a blend of sounds that happens here. So the sh, right, isn't s, huh, it's sh. So when I start then putting all of this together, I got f-ish, fish. And then I reckon, oh, right, the combination of these symbols creates this fish sound, and fish is the name that I give to that thing that I saw, right? So it takes a while to go through that process. But the funny thing about, and the fun thing about text is that as we learn the conventions, right, we become very, very fluid in it, right? But we also have a variety of different writing systems that exist, right? Over on this side here, this is a script from Punjab, it's the Punjabi language, a Chinese symbol, right? An Arabic symbol, right? And even though these are the same types of letters, right, we have different language, English, and now we have French, right? And each one requires a different skill set in being able to decode in order to comprehend what the word or the symbol actually means, right? So there's a level of complexity. So when we see this emerging in society, we got to go all the way back to the Sumerian culture, right? And this is about 5,000 years ago. And what we see here is a cuneiform tablet. Cuneiform basically means wedge-shaped. So all of the different symbolic elements here are created by using lines of varying direction and varying width and varying length. And when we put these wedge-shaped lines together, they create a form of written communication. With this particular form, though, right, it was very exclusive. There were very limited people within the Sumerian society that would have been able to understand, let alone even write with this particular type of writing. This would have been reserved for the elite priests and other elite members of society. Okay, so again, there's a classism that happens as well with written communication in terms of who has access to being able to communicate and respond to the text-based images that we see. Of course, we also can't help but go to ancient Egypt, and here we see the cartouches of Tutmosis III. Right? These were created approximately 1450 BCE, which is about 3,500 years ago. And we see a pictographic-based written language in which the animals and other visual elements here represent sound. So this is kind of like a hybrid between the highly abstract of the cuneiform and the image-based, but it becomes a writing system. So again, we have this separation of who can read and who can write with this particular form of written communication. Lastly, what we see here is the Phoenician writing system, and this emerged in the area of sort of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, Palestine area of the world. Okay, so this is quite old. This is about 3,000 years old and was in use up until probably about 2,200 years ago. Right, so it's fairly new in terms of communication methods. But what you should note here is that this is the same written form that the Latin alphabet that we use today is based upon, right? So this is the earliest form of our sort of European writing systems that we are still using today. Okay, but again, it's about codification and having symbols represent sounds that represent that when the sounds put together create these words and the sounds that we make when we see the things, right? So there's, again, these literally levels of abstraction that we need to be aware of. Okay. So when we start thinking about image, right, something that we can see immediately, and text as something that has to get explicitly decoded, right, we have a very interesting relationship that begins to emerge between the two. And the first thing we need to understand is that images typically, okay, I want to underline that word typically, are used in order to illustrate text. And on the other hand, text is typically used to describe image. And when we see this type of relationship of text describing image and image illustrating text, we say that image and text are in harmony with each other, right? And this is sort of what we would see in children's books and in newspapers and other articles, right? We use them to supplement each other. But in the early 1900s, we start to see artists playing around with the interaction of text and images in unexpected ways. So this is Picasso's Still Life with Chair Caning from 1912. And we have this, the word jeu, which means to play. And we have this still life, and there's these elements, and the text kind of works with the image, but doesn't really, but it's a visual part of the composition. The Dadaists continue to play around with this, right? And here we have Hannah Hawke's Untitled piece from 1922, right? Text is becoming a visual element, a creative element that artists are using as part of their design process. We continue into the 1960s and we see Robert Indiana's very famous painting called Love. And I've got a little excerpt here from The Guardian that I'm just going to share with you. So the word spells love, but the picture is far more than a word. That lovely round O beside the upright L and carried by the bracing E takes on a bodily form. It swoons, it leans, its head has been turned. It flirts. It has been knocked sideways by love. The American pop artist Robert Indiana created a pure and concentrated modern pictogram with this surpassingly famous painting, lettered in the color of love against a blue and green landscape. The image has sold by the million and is a Valentine for our age. Love, what else matters? Right, so what this quote is kind of getting at here is that there's a design element, right? And the main thing that Robert Indiana did is he tilted this O, right? Which creates the whole new dynamic. So it is a word, but it's also a picture. And then the choice of color, right? Red, the symbolic color of love in Western culture, up against the blue, which we typically see in landscape paintings and read as sky, and green as ground, there is a narrative that starts to play. So there's the text becomes an image, which is a very interesting way of working with image and text. Right? We can also then play around with other artists' work, and here we see the Canadian artist's General Idea. This piece was created in 1987 and plays on the idea of love, but specifically during the AIDS epidemic. Okay, so again, we're utilizing the same colors and the same principles, but making an association and understanding what is really powerful about Indiana's work was that the words became a picture, right? And playing around with that traditional relationship. Right? Also in the 1980s, we see work by contemporary artist Jenny Holzer. And she literally just uses text. And it's about where the text is placed that becomes the artwork. So this particular, what we call a truism, or a statement that people generally understand to be true, protect me from what I want, was displayed in Times Square in New York, right? So there's this sort of urban, commercial context and material culture that's sort of so prevalent in New York City, and this idea of protecting ourselves from these things that we want, but that we're also being told that we want, right? So that again, that we have this idea of text as picture, right? Also in the 1980s, we have Barbara Kruger, and now we're starting to see what we're going to refer to as text and image kind of disrupting each other. So looking at this particular piece, we have to understand and start to decode the various elements that we are looking at. So I'm going to start with the image first. Right? We see an image of a person, right? Looking at this, I see some details in the particular, in this face that are feminine. I'm going to look specifically, I'm using the lips, the arched eyebrows, the manicured eyebrows, the expression in the eye, the high emphasized cheekbone. And that sort of sense of symmetry is carried over onto the right-hand side, but I also notice that it's kind of like an X-ray based image, right? It's inverted. It almost looks like we're looking at sort of the inside of herself, right? And that's what X-rays do. They allow us to get a glimpse inside of ourselves. So we have the text as well. Your body is a battleground, right? So there's a couple of ways that we can start to think about this, right? Is if this was just a picture of a woman, right, it would be perhaps about beauty. But by adding the text, we're interrupting our intended, like, oh, she's a pretty woman. We're starting to add in a social comment about how perhaps society battles with the individual about what their body should look like. But we also see that there's a potential battle around an individual's body within themselves, right? They're what they project out to the world versus what they are feeling. And that deeper layer of meaning comes through the interruption of this text over top of the image. And this is what we are going to start thinking about, right? We want to start to create a little bit of conceptual tension between the image and the text. We want to break that rule or that harmony of text describing image and image illustrating text. We want to break that. We want to create tension in order to create new meaning. Okay, so we're going to create image text disruptions, and I've got a couple of exemplars that I'm going to show you. Okay, so as we're going through this, I want you to think about, does the text reinforce the photo? Does the text contradict the photo? And how does the text or image work in tension in order to help us rethink the original meaning? Okay. First of all, I also need to acknowledge that this particular photograph was created by Ronan Donovan, and it's called Canadian Arctic Wolves, created in 1999, and is found on the National Geographic Best 100 website for the late 90s. Okay, so what we have here is again, simple image. There's a, it's kind of raw. We see the inside of the ribs. We're kind of inside. It almost looks like a cage. There's an animal on the outside, the wolf, right? There's another wolf over here on the left, right? And there's just the kind of the interior remains of the carcass over here on the right. But we can also look in the background, and there's this vast landscape that looks fairly empty. And we have this the text that is put in of planning for the future is escapism. And again, this is a Jenny Holzer truism. How these two kind of work together, right? There's a little bit of tension, a little bit of harmony, right? Because given the background space, it looks like we do need to kind of plan for the future. But this idea of escapism and getting away, right? So we're really needing to think about what is essential for us to have versus what is it that we want to have. And this is doing a pretty decent job at interrupting the text, interrupting the image. Okay? But if we take a look at this example where we simply change the wording, it's vital to live in harmony in nature it's vital to live in harmony with nature, right? We have explicit harmony between text and image. This is not an effective image text disruption because we are seeing the natural cycle, right? We're seeing the food chain in action, and that is in fact a harmonious event, right? We can't, it's kind of gross, there's a brutality about it, but in its most fundamental, right, that the food chain and the cycle of life is a harmonious cycle. It allows life to continue on. And in this case, I would argue that the text is explicitly describing what it is that we see. I'm going to not comment on this particular image. I'm just going to kind of let you sit back and think about this one for a couple minutes and allow you to come up with your own interpretation and to figure out whether or not it is the text and image are in harmony or if they are in tension with each other. All right. Okay, so if you go back to our main website on exploring the postmodern principles of design and the art vocabulary, then you'll find the activity that goes with this particular video. So using the National Geographic images that are linked in our Google Classroom site and on the web page, as well as Jenny Holzer's truisms, I want you to work on creating your own image text disruptions to show me that you can move beyond the traditional and expected relationship of text and image, right? That idea of harmony between the two, deliberately create tension in order to create new meaning. And that is what we can do with image and text in our postmodern world. All right, this one is a hard concept to kind of get our heads around. I appreciate your diligence in sticking with it to the very end of this video. If you have any questions, please make sure that you're asking your teacher. And good luck. I can't wait to see what you're able to create. Bye.